What is up, guys? It's Mason once again. If you're watching this video, you may be just like me and you are on a losing streak in chess, or you may be someone who is just trying to know what to avoid so as to not enter a losing streak. If you're either one of these people, you are in the right place. But before we get into the video, remember to like, comment, and subscribe. It really does help me out. Now let's get into the video. How to lose at chess. Okay, so one of the quickest ways to lose at chess is hanging pieces. Now, to hang a piece simply means to give a piece freely to be captured. Now, there are three main ways that I see that pieces are hanged. The first way is simply moving the piece into a square where it's not adequately defended. Number two is reducing the number of defenders on a piece versus the number of attackers. What that means is that if there are three pieces attacking a piece and you have three pieces defending, but then you remove one of the defenders, you end up hanging the piece. And the final way is hanging a piece tactically, which is what happens at the higher levels. At the lower levels in chess, you are more or less likely to hang pieces by jumping them to free squares. So here I have two examples from my own games. Like I said, I've been in a bit of a losing streak, and these are the common things I've noticed that have been happening within this time period. So in this game, I'm playing black, and it's a okay, this is not Scandinavian. I was basically in a downward spiral, so I began like trying like different things just to see if I could beat myself out of it. Don't do that, just take a break. But then we got into this position, which is not so much bad for black, but I ended up trying to pin my opponent's knight to the queen so that I could put pressure on it, PP on the PP. But after my opponent moves, I couldn't seem to like register it in my head and simply went this way, hanging my knight. So this is one of the ways you can hang a piece. The second way is... Sorry, let me find the game. Where is Carlos? Yes. The second way, which I mentioned, is to hang a piece tactically, or one of the other ways I mentioned is to hang a piece tactically. And here again, I'm playing as black. And in the Queen A5 Scandinavian, when the bishop comes in here, it's a well-known fact, right, that your opponent has the idea of moving the knight either here or here. Most often they bring it here. You can't actually take the knight because your queen is on pre. So it's a well-known idea. I know this idea very well. But in my downward spiral, in this position after my opponent moves his knight, forget completely that the queen is hanging and play takes, right? And I realized that this is also one of the reasons why people lose. You miss the tactic for which your piece would hang, and then you hang your pieces. So to avoid hanging pieces, you should, for example, if you're at the lower levels, always account for every single piece on the board. When you before you make a move and after your opponent makes a move, always account for it. And when you realize there's tension on the pieces, you always have to ask, when should I relieve myself of this tension? Like there are many things attacking one thing and you're just holding the tension because if your opponent were to capture, it would be to his disadvantage. But then you keep noticing that as the game is shifting, it gets to a point your opponent can't capture. When you notice that that is happening, then you simply move the piece, right? So you always have to check and account for every piece that you have and how your opponent could make attempts at capturing them. Let's move on to the next point. So the next reason for which you might lose games is overthinking. Now, this may not be so much of a problem in classical chess, and even in rapid chess, it may not be so much of a problem. You've seen from my rapid game videos that I'm usually overthinking, and that's fine. That's granted because you have enough time to think, and there's also increment. But in the lower time controls, overthinking can become very detrimental. Even in rapid chess, overthinking can become detrimental once the time gets low. So in certain complex positions, you have to really consider what's going on in order to make moves. But when you find yourself overthinking, just simply play the move that you felt the safest playing, right? Once you can't find any other thing, you don't try and force it. You just simply play the simplest move you found that takes you out of any issues, and then you go from there. So we'll look at this game I played against Lord Duds. Once again, it's a Scandinavian. We have this C4 line, which is usually one of the best ways to play against the Scandinavian. Of course, c5 is a good idea. The reason being you are chipping away at your opponent's center. If he takes, the position is very simple from there. Black is equalizing and having a great time. But I get into a bit of trouble. But after the game moves a bit, once I get this kind of position, let me turn on the engine so you can see the evaluation. It gets to a point where I have a good position, but I realize that there's a lot of potential pressure that my opponent can place on me. So from move 12, I'll put a picture on the screen. You notice that I start spending a whole lot of time trying to figure out what to do next, right? There are so many things I was trying to consider in the position. One of the main things, especially after my opponent played knight to this square, is that I was thinking about how I could try and force this with the idea of this. That way I could win my opponent's queen. And I was so much trying to force this idea to work. I was thinking about so many things. Should I take now, allow my opponent to take, then bring this here? Like, I was thinking about so many things that I overspent my time. And eventually, when we got to this position, still trying to force the idea, trying to force my opponent to take, I spent over a minute or a minute and a half before playing this knight move. And I was up on time here. Now I'm behind on time. This position is completely winning for me. My opponent, the onus is on my opponent to do something. And if I had realized that, I could have played a bit more patiently, because you realize that as the game kept going on, my opponent starts to make a weakness, which is this move here. He makes these slight weaknesses, and eventually I do overpower him, but then I don't have enough time to win the position. Right, so I ended up losing this game simply because I was overthinking. So like I was saying, when you find yourself in a complex position, there's normally a very quick, safe move you can play, right? That prevents you from spending so much time. I'm not saying do not think, but I'm saying that once you realize that it's so difficult and there are so many things to calculate in other variations, pick the simplest variation that saves you from majority of the troubles and just go from there. Eventually, the time advantage will help you in the end game or when time gets low for your opponent. So avoid overthinking. And sometimes overthinking forces you to make bad moves, because you keep overthinking, then you mess up the move order, and then eventually you blunder a piece, right? So overthinking, and I personally like to really think about my moves, right? So I often lost due to time. I would get good positions, but I would lose on time. Let's move on to the next point. So the next point is missing tactics, right? Just missing obvious tactics. Some tactics you may not be able to perceive them, mainly due to your level and experience, right? The more positions you see and the more times you lose to certain tactics, the more aware you become of them. But here I find myself falling for an obvious tactic. So again, most of these games I'm playing as black, you notice, but don't worry, there are games of me playing as white. And we get into this position. This is a very evenish position. Scandinavian normally leads to drawish positions. We get into this position, and if there's anything my opponent is going to try and do is to double up and try to increase his assault. There are ideas of his knight coming in here to pressure me, and the queen looking down here should always be ringing in your head that once this bishop moves, this knight is on pre. You should always be aware of it, right? And here I suddenly get the bright idea that, hey, this is a very nice square for my knight. So I would want to get my knight to this square. But I realized that the moment I play this, my opponent is simply going to go here and the pressure begins, right? We have moves like this, we have moves like this, and there's going to be so much pressure. So I want to sort of close down the file. And I'm like, oh, bishop to h5, because now if my opponent takes and I take and then he does this, I do have this move. And I save the position, right? That is basically what was going through my head. And of course, you have seen the problem with this. My opponent simply goes rook takes. I can't take back. And even if I do take here, the knight takes. And this is already a losing position for me. Right? It's a very obvious thing you should not fall for. So what makes you more astute, or what makes you miss tactics less, is playing puzzles, right? Puzzles helps you have an eye or a sense or an intuition for tactics. So it just pops up into your head that this is a possibility, right? Like when you see a bishop on D, like if you're playing as white, you see a bishop on D3, you see a knight on F3, and your queen is on D1, you maybe think, oh, there's a possibility of bishop takes H7, right? It just comes to your mind. Once you see it, it's just like, oh, it's a possibility. I can't do it now, but maybe in the future I could do it, right? So missing obvious tactics is one of the ways you could lose at chess. So try as much as possible to know your tactics so well that you don't make simple blunders like this. So the next reason is over calculation. Now, if you are wondering why I am saying on to the next point, it's for the sake of editing, right? And my PC takes a long time to load, unlike like some other people. The internet is quite slow here. So if I click the game, I have to wait for the game to actually load. You know, and sometimes it takes a while. So I use that to just know when to cut off and when to continue. So if you're wondering why he keeps saying the exact same thing, right? So the next point, like I said, is miscalculation, where you calculate a variation, but you don't really take consideration of everything, right? The intermezzos and all those kinds of things. So you calculate that, oh, this plan is working, but it's not actually working because you missed a line in the variation. Again, this happens at high levels, especially when you overthink. Sometimes you get to the point where you overthink and then you miss something because you thought about, like, let's say 20 different variations. When you started playing the right one, you missed a line because you started conflicting the ideas, right? So here I'm playing as white, and let's get to move 12. We play a very simple game and we are getting into a quick end game. My opponent takes, I take, he plays takes here. And I had calculated this ahead of time, so I wasn't thinking. For some reason, I thought the best way for my opponent to capture is like this, which makes no sense. But that's what I was calculating. So in the moment he played this, I didn't really think so much. I played queen takes, assuming that if takes, this is good for me, right? But obviously, you can see, it's 2 seconds I used to make that move, right? Obviously, I missed the fact that the rook takes my queen and then I'm losing. So miscalculation can and will hurt you in chess. Let's look at another game. It's a game against machine. You can see that it's going to take a little bit of time to load. Yep. But here I'm playing again as white, and we'll move quickly into the end game. We are going to move 33. Yeah. So around here, I'm having a bad position, right? These pawns are deadly. My opponent is on his way to win, but my opponent makes a wrong decision here. I think he assumed that if he takes, I'll take with my rook. But I take with my pawn, and now this position is drawn. All I have to do is draw it, right? My opponent is the one who is pushing for the win. I'm pushing for the draw based on the way the position looks. So my opponent plays rook here, which is a strange move. King comes in, rook goes back, rook comes in. He develops his king in. Rook takes, king takes. I had calculated that if my opponent pushes this pawn and I come in here, once the pawn gets into this square, it's not so hard for me to stop the pawn. I could see that. I was calling the square of the pawn, but it looks like a rectangle here, so I couldn't really say it like that. But I could understand that, okay, I would catch up to my opponent's pawn before it can advance. And second of all, this king cannot easily infiltrate the position, so I know that I can leave the defense of these 2 pawns. So I calculate that correctly. My opponent plays this move, and the best move is simply to go pawn push, because my opponent would always be stuck to the defense of my pawn, while I would also subsequently be able to get closer to his pawns, right? Something like this. If he takes, obviously, I'm going to promote. So maybe we'd have to do some slow moves here. And eventually, now we get into this sort of like position. Again, if my opponent moves, this is the problem. So we just begin to dilly-dally, shilly-shally, and the game is a draw. But I miscalculate here, thinking that I can create a win or something. I go pawn takes, and after king takes, I'm thinking, oh, I could actually stop my opponent, but I can't. And as you can see, my opponent does the right thing here. If I leave the defense of this pawn to capture this guy, he captures him, and his king gets here before I can stop him, and that's why I lose the game. So I miscalculated the position, played the wrong move, and I ended up paying the price. So you have to be very, very careful, like when you are calculating these variations. Always make sure that your calculation is on point. How do you get better at calculating? By playing longer games, playing longer time controls. You get used to thinking about common positions you get in chess very deeply, and you begin to know that, oh, this is the best option at this point. That's one of the ways you can improve your ability to calculate accurately. The second one is to study these positions, right? You just study them. know what's expected of you in such positions, right? King and pawn endgame, what's expected of you, so on and so forth. Playing puzzles, all these things. Analyzing your games also helps you improve your calculation, because when you analyze your games, you see the wrong decisions you make and you know how you can fix them. So the final point is over pressing. Over pressing simply means going too hard on a particular idea, right? You see an idea and you want the idea to work so much that you just keep pushing for it, when the best thing would have been to just disengage and play the game from that position, right? Because you could, I mean, it may be a tempting idea because maybe it's an aggressive idea, you're putting pressure on your opponent, but it gets to a point when you overpress that you begin to lose hold of the position, and then suddenly everything seems to be hanging, right? So you should know when you are overpressing. Sometimes, like, you have pinned a piece and you are trying as much as possible to force that pinned piece to be captured, right? When you realize that you are so much overemphasizing on an idea, like, and ignoring so many of the things your opponent is doing, just disengage. Or when you realize that you're trying to overpress or you're trying to force an idea but it's not working, like every other idea you're thinking about is not working, simply disengage. Don't force the idea to work. And that's basically what we call overpressing. You really want the idea to work when it doesn't work. And I did something like that here. So once again, let me just not forget to add this. I've been in a downward spiral, so a lot of the times I'm not even really calculating to the best of my ability. I'm simply just forcing things to happen. I'll speak more about this at the end of the video. So takes, king takes, and I go queen here. Obviously it's not hanging, right? And my opponent comes in this way. Now my knight is hanging. My opponent could have taken this knight a long time ago, but I don't know, he got scared. And after bishop comes in check, the pawn comes in, I go knight here. Obviously I'm attacking this guy, and my opponent goes queen check. I play pawn push. These are all like lines I've seen before. And of course, if my opponent takes, I can simply go this way. So my opponent takes, sorry, I said if my opponent, actually if my opponent takes and I come in this way, king comes in here, and this is the perfect moment to disengage. But I was trying so hard to make this thing work, because I was thinking about check here. I wanted the check here to work because I thought I had something in the position. But I should ask myself, is my position actually safe? Because once this check comes in, there's so much going on wrong for me, right? Even if I go up here, my opponent's making a queen. So my opponent has a very strong counter-attacking threat. If I can't find a concrete idea to keep the pressure on my opponent, my king's defense is going to crumble. So when you look at this position, what can you do, right? After check, you lose this. You could say you castle queen side here, but then the opponent's king runs in here, and then what, right? The queen can't really come in here. You can't take the rook. There's nothing happening here. Pawn push here, attacking this doesn't help, right? Nothing is making this position work for me. But I was just trying to make this idea work, and I went for the move. Knight takes with check, rook takes, and you can see the problem. Now this bishop is hanging. I play this check, the king blocks, and there's nothing. From this point on, every move just makes me lose, right? If he takes, I move. He can create a queen. Eventually my bishop might get lost. In fact, even this queen is hanging. So if I save the queen, everything is just going on wrong for me from this point on, right? So what should I have done? After this, you disengage, right? And now you see that this is actually nice, because if you take, it's not about taking. Umbrella pawn, you simply hide this way, and now you have some pressure on your opponent. You can even bring this knight in at some point. The attack is working, right? But when you get to this point where you're overpressing, you're over trying to make an idea work, when everything seems to tell you that the idea is not going to work, you're definitely going to lose that game, right? So avoid overpressing. Calculate the position. If you find nothing, disengage, fix your defenses, develop another piece, and that's how you win. For example, attacking the king with just 2 pieces mostly doesn't work. You need more pieces, right? So if you're trying to force the 2 pieces to attack, it doesn't work. Disengage, add more pieces to the attack, and your attack will succeed. So these are the 5 main things I saw in my games. There are many things that can affect your games, but these are the most common ones I saw in my games. And what I realized is that the combination of all this is in simply board awareness, your ability to understand what is going on at the board at every single point in time. That is board awareness. So building strong board awareness makes you a much better chess player and helps you to win more chess games. So everything I've mentioned in this video are ways you can, are aspects of board awareness and the ways you can work on your board awareness. Now, the second thing, I might touch on this more in a different video, is about mentality. When your mental is not the best, you are more or less likely to make these errors, right? When you are at your best, the likeliness of you making an error like this is very low. But when you are not performing at your best, which could come from mental fatigue, lack of rest, I mean, so many things, it can, make you play in this type of way. So when you find yourself playing like this, when you know you are not the type to make such mistakes commonly, the best thing I'll suggest is that you just take a break from chess. You can just take like a 1-week break from chess. Just take your mind off it, come back, play some puzzles, and then try and get back into the groove of things. But when you notice you are in this type of downward spiral and you try and force things, you are more or less going to get into a deeper pool. So like for me, I was 1889, almost 1900. I dropped all the way to 1674. I've managed to claw my way back up to about 1700, 1714. I hope I can reclaim my previous position, but that's what the downward spiral does to you. Right? And it's been going on for about 3 weeks, 4 weeks. Yeah. So take this lesson from me, and I hope it helped you. If you enjoyed this video, remember to like, comment, and subscribe. It really does help me out. Comment, let me know what type of video you want to see, and I'll be very willing to do it. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. Hope you like the new setup. It will be much better in streams. I mean, I know you can't see the bookshelf well. I'm just trying to make the background look a little bit better. I hope you like it, and I'll see you in the next video. Have a great rest of your day.